Hey guys, you're listening to Wingin' It with Holly. In this podcast series, I'll be sharing the fun and interesting things I've learned about birds since I started really noticing them 5 years ago. I'm no expert though, so along the way I'll be picking the brains of my knowledgeable birdie friends, the human ones that is, so we can learn and wing it together. You can see birds anywhere, in a city or the countryside, watching from a balcony or your local park. And I'm hoping these short episodes will help you notice and learn more about our feathered friends, especially if you have never taken the time to get to know them before. You may have noticed that here in the UK, a lot of our birds seem to disappear after the summer, but where do they go and why? In spring this year, I spoke to my Uncle Ivan, who has been bird watching for 50 plus years, about bird migration. So if you're in the UK, come autumn, you might be wondering, where have all our birds gone? And that's not to say they all go, but there are a lot less than there are in the summer. So about half of the UK bird species are migratory birds. Some are summer migrants, some are winter migrants. We also get, I think it's passage migrants, partial migrants. They don't necessarily go to the same place or at the same time or even in the same direction, but generally these birds don't stay put in one country all year round, and they will have very long journeys ahead of them at some point. So why do they do this, and where on earth do they go? So today I'm at RSPB Pulborough Nature Reserve in West Sussex. I'm here with my Uncle Ivan, who is a bit of a legend in our in terms of, I know you're not going to agree with this, but in terms of your bird watching experience, you know, you've been doing this for many years, you know your stuff, and I just had to jump at the opportunity to record something with you. And today we're going to chat about migration, because I do think there is that big question, you know, where do these birds go? But before we get into the nitty gritty, I just, I kind of want to introduce you. And I wanted to know how long you've been bird watching and how you got into it. Like, what was your first proper experience of bird watching that kind of really, that something clicked in you and you were just like, oh my God, I love this so much and I need to do this all the time, every day, because that's, I think, what you do.
Well, I suppose it is what I do, and it's I think it's an interest that really allows you to kind of experience life in a much better way, because every journey is interesting, and everywhere you go, there's something to see, and you're never bored, and that's a great thing, really. And no matter what level, and it's not about expertise; it's just about taking in what you see. But for me, that started when I was quite young, when I don't know, 10 maybe, something like that, and my father, somehow, I don't really know how, but he wasn't particularly interested, but suddenly got involved with a group of people who were setting up a natural history society in Beverley, and he kind of got the bug, and I ended up being dragged along, but kind of just went with the flow, really. And so it was a very early upbringing that was kind of surrounded by that, and surrounded by he later became a warden of local nature reserves, so I would go along and help with that as well. So there was a bit of in my teenage years, some of that was spent kind of managing nature reserves.
Your dad was a warden?
Yeah.
I didn't know this.
Yeah, he looked after 2 reserves for the what was then the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust, or Yorkshire Naturalist Trust as it was then, up in Yorkshire. So weekends were often spent there doing stuff to kind of keep it as a good place for wildlife, because they need looking after.
So this is as you know, news to me. I didn't realise you started so young, and I think so. That's really wonderful that it kind of was embedded into your life at such a young age. But also, I think the fact that you've been doing it for so long and you still get so much out of it, you still choose to do this a lot, even though you might be experiencing or hearing the same birds that you've heard before, birds that you've seen before, you still clearly get a lot from that experience, which is just really nice, and kind of it goes with what you just said about sort of getting so much out of it. I know this might be quite hard. Do you have a favourite bird? Can you reduce it down to one? I know you've probably got a few, but could you just give us one, like, that really sticks out to you?
At this precise second, the robin that's bouncing around our feet is quite
okay.
nice. But
Yeah. Yeah.
but I guess
We're always drawn by robins on this podcast. They follow us around.
I do get asked that quite often, and I do find it hard, and it is
Yeah.
difficult to narrow it down to one. But
Yeah.
I guess one that keeps coming back, which I've not actually seen yet so far,
Mhm.
because they're a migrant,
Mhm.
is the swift.
Yeah.
And they're in the country at the moment.
Yeah, I saw my
coming
first
early
one
May.
literally 2 days ago.
Oh, well, then you've beaten me. 'Cause I've not actually seen one yet. He's looking around. So, but there are many, and but that one is just quite charismatic, and that's, I think that's one of the things about people just being aware of birds and not worried about identifying them necessarily, because if you're in a town where swifts live, they just become a part of the audio soundscape of the place without necessarily seeing them well. You just see them, their presence, or you hear their presence screaming through the town, quite literally. And
I remember you saying something to me once, which actually is very relevant to what we're about to talk about, is that the sound of swifts is the sound of summer for you. And I guess that's largely because obviously they're not here throughout in the UK throughout the winter and the sort of the autumn and early spring. That is kind of really, they're here in our summer, and that screeching is very much and
it's often
sign of summer.
It's often very low. And when we lived in Sandy, the swifts nesting around the town would come and fly in at kind of head height over the marketplace. You know? So they were very, very hard to miss, really, and that's the nice thing about them. That they just have a presence about them, and once you delve a bit more into their lifestyle and their history as well, then they're just adds to that. But you don't need to know all that, but they're just a magic presence.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. There is going to be I am going to do an episode on swifts. It might come out before this or after this, but yeah, keep your eyes peeled. So let's talk about migration. So, let's keep this on a very basic level. What is migration in terms of birds? What are they literally doing, and why are they doing this?
Well, good question, and it's actually a subject that's been talked about for thousands of years. Aristotle did a lot of thinking about migration. Well, not migration, but about why do birds change? When he was in Greece, he would have different birds in the summer to different birds in the winter. And what he speculated, because the thought of little birds travelling to countries that no one knew existed obviously was out of someone's mindset, really.
I think that is something that people don't realise happens, is that we also there are birds in the UK that, like very small birds we have, you might be able to name some now, I don't know, go on.
Redstart,
that, they are making incredible journeys. So why are they doing this? Why are they travelling so far? Why do they leave us? And what is their main purpose for this?
Well, most things with animals, it's either sex or food, essentially, and that drives life. And the rhythms of that drive life, and so for birds, they migrate either to find food source. So in the winter, they will migrate to places where they get away from the cold, or the cold is preventing the natural food being there. So they have to move. If they're if they're an insect eater, then they can't feed when there's a lot of snow on the ground. So they move somewhere where they can still get insects.
Where it's probably warmer, where there'll be more insects around.
Yes, and that warmth is relative. So common birds that you might see around town would be a blackbird, say. In the winter, you might, if you notice a bit more, notice that actually there might be quite a few more blackbirds around, because a lot of the blackbirds that we have here in the winter come from Scandinavia. They've migrated across the sea because it's warmer here and there's less snow cover, so they can still find food. So there'll be many, many more blackbirds in this country in the autumn and the winter. They're just leaving now, along with other thrushes that breed in Scandinavia as well. But they'll move for food, and then they'll move back to their breeding areas during the spring and summer. And similarly, birds like cuckoo, say, one that people certainly know the sound of, not often seen, and aren't doing very well as a species, though numbers are declining. But they are. There's a great organisation called British Trust for Ornithology who kind of do all things birds and all things bird migration, and they they've been set up ringing schemes back in the early 1900s for birds, where they catch them very humanely and only by very experienced people,
Yep.
and put a unique ring on a bird, like a unique identifying number on it,
Yep.
that will say where the bird was ringed, how old it was, and they can tell that by the state of the plumage, how long some of the feathers are, how short they are, if they're brand new or if they're very old, all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of very precise measurements made of the bird itself. All that gets written down, and then the bird is let go again and it carries on its way. And it was only when ringing started to develop properly that some of the common things that we now think of, journeys that people make, actually people suddenly found out where they were going. We're sat by a pond at the moment, and at one time swallows were thought to overwinter in the bottom of a pond, because they would gather around reed beds, and suddenly they would disappear in the reed bed because it's a safe place, and then next day they'd be gone. So they speculate, because they had no concept of moving to the country, they thought they were under the ground.
What?
So so swallows roosting under reed beds underground was thought to be the normal thing, and it was only really.
Hang on, how long ago were they thinking this?
Not very. Victorian times.
What? Oh, okay, okay.
And it started. It was a common hypothesis, I suppose you might say, and then but there was nothing to. Apart from the fact you would never find anything under the ground. I don't think many people went digging up. But it was only really when they started putting rings on birds, and they were finding birds that were ringed in the UK were appearing in South Africa.
Yes.
And that kind of just blew people's minds. And you knew that was the case because this bird had the ring on, and you knew exactly who'd ringed it and where.
So they basically finally were able to sort of have the data, the proof to say that, this is where they were going, and that's because of the ringing. And
that's still ongoing now. There are lots of ringing stations now, and but there are still gaps in that knowledge. There are still, we know where the swallows go, house martins, swifts. That's still a bit unsure,
really?
Not known really very much.
Why is that?
Because they're not recovered. So the ringing thing only works. Well, traditionally, it's only really worked if the bird's found dead.
Right.
Nowadays, with digital photography, you can often take a picture of the bird and read the ring, which is great.
Yeah.
But you don't see many dead birds, so consequently, you don't get many ring recoveries.
Right. Got it.
So traditionally, it's relied on a bird being found dead or injured or captured in some way. So inevitably, the numbers are a lot less. But the BTO, the British Trust for Ornithology, have recently been doing a lot more work as science and technology has kind of moved on as well. They've gone from, they still do the bird ringing, but they also moved on to satellite transmitters. And these are tiny, tiny transmitters now that they can attach to birds, and that will monitor everywhere they go. And things like cuckoos, for example, they now know where they go in Angola and Gabon and that kind of Central Africa area. But interesting, we think of them as our birds, but actually that bird will spend 15% of its life in the UK, 47% in Africa. It's an African bird.
That's a really good point, because I'm going to ask you, like, sort of which of these birds are summer migrants and which are winter migrants. So to sort of, I guess, on a simplified level, come autumn in the UK, a lot,
and spring.
And spring, sorry, because it happens
like
twice a year. A lot of our birds will basically, they'll start making a journey, and they'll literally travel across the world to find, typically to a warmer climate where they'll find more food, more insects, or just whatever, and just a warmer climate. So this is like,
that's true, but it's also you'll get the food, and if they go and breed in the Arctic in the summer, there's more daylight, so more time to feed.
Yes.
There's fewer predators.
Oh, yeah.
So there's a lot of other things.
There's a lot of variations, isn't there? I mean,
But if the food wasn't there, they wouldn't be there. So.
Right. I mean, in a way, when you think about it, they're for the summer migrants, they're basically getting to spend their whole year in the sun, which actually sounds very idyllic, really, doesn't it? It's it's like they're basically skipping the winter. So
what that does mean, of course, though, is that some birds will do it in very long leaps, and will fly thousands of miles. They fatten up. They will gather, like, maybe increase their body weight 50% just to go on migration.
Yes.
And they'll do very long journeys. But others will do shorter journeys than stopping off. That's the passage migrants.
Yes, I was
And
going
the
to ask
key
you
thing
about
for
that.
them is that the places where they need to rest and feed are
Yeah.
like a motorway service station, effectively.
Yes.
They need to go in, rest, recuperate,
Yeah.
feed, and fly on
And
again.
then move on again.
So the key thing about it's all very well being, here at Pulborough, say, but actually if the birds that come here need the fueling stops to get here, and those fueling stops disappear, and quite often they aren't areas that are currently under any regulation, then the birds won't get here.
Right. Or they might make it here but not make it onto their last stop, if you like, where they're heading to.
Yeah. So we're on what's called the East Atlantic Flyway, technically, which is a migration route, and there are several others across the globe where birds take kind of key journeys north and south, sometimes east and west.
Yeah.
And all of those flyways have got these important fueling stops on the way, and that's what needs
looking after,
protecting, essentially, because they're often places where people think there's not a lot there. It's kind of the wasteland, or it's just the rubbishy, marshy bit that the airport gets built on.
Exactly. Right. People think is not important, but actually it could be so significant to.
And it may only be crucial for a few months of the year, in a sense. But it's vital that they're understood where they are, and then you can start to put in some work with local people to make sure that they are kind of preserved and still have some usefulness for nature. Really.
Yeah. So our summer visitors. So in temperate places like the UK, I understand half of our birds are migratory. Half of our bird species are migratory. So for the summer visitors, what are we talking about? So I know we've got swifts, swallows, like house martins. What other birds sort of arrive here, like around sort of now, spring, and then leave in the autumn?
So the common ones around the towns and gardens would be those that you mentioned, but also there are nightingale, which is one that a lot of people may have heard of if they're not seen. So we've heard some of those.
We've heard some today.
They're kind of a southeasterly distribution, really, although they do get north a little bit, but they're not doing desperately well. So places where they are looked after are important. So that's a fairly critical one. The swifts are, as you say, coming back. But there's also huge numbers of birds at sea, seabirds. So Britain the UK has got some internationally important seabird colonies as well, and they are migrant birds.
Yeah.
They're seabirds. They spend all their time at sea, except when they need to lay an egg, which obviously they can't do in the water. No. So they need to find somewhere where they can do that safely.
Yeah.
And the cliffs particularly around the north of the UK, and especially around sort of the Shetland Islands and the Orkneys and other areas, but also slightly more accessible would be places like Bempton in East Yorkshire, which has got England's largest mainland seabird colony. Something like 200,000 birds are all there at the moment, all just trying to lay an egg and rear young before they go back to sea again. And then in the autumn, August time onwards, around the coast, there'll be tens of thousands of birds moving around the sea that will be quite hard to see. But there's a bird called a shearwater, which is like I suppose like a dark gull, nests in burrows on islands, Ramsey, that sort of area. But they will leave us and migrate to South America. Yeah. And huge numbers.
Don't blame them.
No, quite. You can see them, from the coasts of the UK when the weather's right and they get pushed further inland. And they are exceptionally good at kind of navigating the sea in all weathers. They're just remarkable in the way they're kind of adapted for cruising around the oceans, really, often with very little effort needed. If they get the wind behind them, they can just go with using very, very little energy at all and travel for thousands of miles.
Yeah,
so,
incredible.
Yeah, it's not just the land birds. It's
no,
not just
of course.
our
first
ones. We forget the ones at sea sometimes.
We do.
And again, they need places to feed, and places where there is less disturbance and not overfishing, which there's a lot of, unfortunately.
So we've also warblers, wheat ears, Wheatears.
Wheat,
How do you say that?
wheatear is the
Wheatears.
word. It's a derivation of white arse, which is the
Is
old
it really?
the old name. Because
Nice.
when they fly, they've got white on the top
Oh,
of the tail.
white ass.
They used to be called white arse, so it became gentrified to wheatear. So,
Wind chats, redstarts, tree pipits,
yeah,
nightjars,
yeah,
flycatchers, turtle doves, obviously.
yeah,
Well,
turtle doves.
um,
But again, all those birds are, well, not doing well, but in varying amounts. Turtle
yes.
doves especially
Yeah.
are
No.
suffering,
Yeah.
as you'll know, and
Yeah.
nightingales too are suffering quite a bit in this country.
Yeah.
But it's for the similar reasons of needing that kind of those places, say, the food, or what happens when they're not in this country, when they're not on a reserve like Pulborough or Wildlife Trust Reserve or whatever, they become vulnerable.
Yeah.
And those things need a bit of, there just needs to be somewhere for that fuel and food and whatever.
So we also get winter visitors, which is the same idea, but basically because they start up even further north than us, so Scandinavia and places like Iceland, their journey south actually brings them to the UK.
Yeah.
So I understand that's a lot of kind of like wading, some ducks, geese, some types of swans, like wading birds. I get the impression a lot of our winter visitors are more like that. So
there are some of those. I mean, if you come here, it will be very different to today, and the flood levels that are protected here will be host to thousands of ducks and geese. And geese are a big one. Where I live up in the East Riding, they're 5 o'clock in the evening over the town as the people are going back from work. You'll hear pink-footed geese flying in the dark over the town. And again, it's a bit like the swift call. It's like the winter equivalent. It's magic sound of pink-footed geese kind of going back to roost again.
You're right. It's a reassuring sound, isn't it? Both of those sounds, because it's like, they're on their way, or they've made it here, kind of thing. It's because you never really. This is the other thing, is that I was next going to ask you about where in the world some of our summer migrants travel to, because some of these birds make incredibly long journeys, and they travel across, I don't know what the word is, like a course of water. What's that? Like water, like sea, expanses of sea, which are huge. And when you imagine that it could be a bird as small as I don't know. Well, I mean, swifts are pretty small, but windchats are small birds. The fact that it's literally flying across an expanse of sea, say, to get from Spain to Africa, how exhausting that journey must be, how dangerous that journey must be, how easy it must be for that bird potentially not to get to its destination. So where do some of our migrants go to? I mean, we've mentioned Spain and Africa.
That's true, and I mentioned that East Atlantic Flyway before, and on that particular route, the routes are designed. The routes exist because they take the shortest crossings, particularly over water. For land birds, especially, they don't like crossing large expanses of water. So when they get down to Spain, they will often go down. Some of them will island hop over the Med, so they'll go across the smaller islands. But quite a lot of them will come down through southern Spain, and cross where the water is the narrowest. So at a place called Tarifa, it's 12 miles to Africa.
Right.
You can see Africa very clearly from the shore.
So
but the sea is still pretty rough and still pretty dangerous. So they need to cross. Often at night they'll cross when it's a bit safer. Birds of prey don't, because they need thermals or updrafts of air to keep. They can't flap their wings fast, so they've basically got to soar.
Right.
So they need to wait for the weather to be right to make the crossing, and they'll be sitting on hills in Morocco, waiting for the right weather, waiting until they can see the sea, see the cliffs on the other side. And then when the weather's right and the winds are right, they'll just all get up in one go and come across in thousands of them.
Yeah. And so you've mentioned Tarifa, which is the most southerly point of Spain. right?
Of Europe, yeah.
Of Europe even. So yeah, I mean, it's very sensible, really. They a lot of birds travel there so that they can make the shortest journey across the sea. And this is, I assume, one of the best places to see this migration. We've been there several times to witness flocks of birds coming across the sea, both on their way up to Europe or on their way back to Africa.
It's a good space to see the big birds, particularly. The smaller birds are trickier down there,
of course,
although they're still there.
Yeah.
And indeed, other birds will be there waiting for the migrant birds, because they're, and even bats. There's a species of giant nocturnal bat, I think it is, that live in some of the forests towards the coast down there, that will actually catch tide migrant birds, the small birds, and eat them. And there's a falcon that lives on the islands of the Mediterranean that delays its breeding till September, when it has young, and it will fly out to sea, catch tide migrants, bring them back.
Oh my gosh! Well, so they've learn these behaviours. Yeah,
absolutely. So I mean, birds just take food.
Yeah,
it's just
fair enough. They have to survive, don't they?
And the other route across Europe is going through the Bosphorus and Turkey, because again, that's that shortest bit of sea crossing.
Right.
And then they'll drop down into Africa from the other side. So there are these two routes, one on the west, one on the kind of eastern edge of Africa, that are particularly good for.
Are they all generally heading to Africa? Where do they also? Some, I assume, stay in Spain. Some
do. I mean, so blackcaps are all over the place in southern Spain. Chiffchaffs often down there in winter. But by and large, a lot of them are going a bit further south, and not just into North Africa. They'll go right, as we said with swallows, right down to southern Africa.
Right.
There's a lot around the central area where the forests are, where there's lots of food. But of course, the daylight is shorter there. You're near the equator, so you only have 6 hours of daylight, 6 hours of darkness, and it's really quick transition. So the amount of time to feed is limited compared to breeding up in the Arctic, where you've got almost 24 hours of daylight. You can feed all day.
Similarly, we've also made a trip to Falsterbo in Sweden to witness the same activity, but going. Wait, was that going?
That was coming south.
Coming south. So we were essentially watching the birds that were heading. Wait, what time of year was that? That was September. So they were heading back down to Africa. Yeah. So we went to Falsterbo because, again, it's a point in Northern Europe which allows the birds to travel over the shortest.
So the Baltic is one of the big sea crossings they need to make. So at Falsterbo, they'll come down the coast there, and then they'll kind of then go across the sea. And the Baltic, if you go to Falsterbo, you can not only see the honey buzzards and birds of prey coming down south, but on the right day and in the right weather, there'll just be streams and streams of chaffinches and blue tits coming back, thousands of them coming.
That would be amazing.
And some of the guys on the boats in the Baltic, if the weather's a bit rough, the boats will just suddenly be, at night, will be inundated with birds. They'll just be covered with small birds everywhere, all over the people, over anything they can hang on to. So they take that kind of refuge.
That would be so incredible to see, wouldn't it?
Yeah. I mean, the guys on the oil rigs see a lot of birds.
I was going to mention this, actually. There is a really fantastic video on YouTube, isn't there, of this, I don't know what kind of boat it is. Maybe, is it an oil rig? It's, I think you shared it with me once. It's all these, like a variety of birds that basically are just hitching a ride on this boat, which is, I assume, traveling between Africa and Europe. Do you know what video I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And it just one by one, all these birds. It's very smart. They're basically they're tired. This journey must be exhausting, and they just need a ride, and so they're just sat there
or they just need to rest.
Exactly.
The oil rigs give them a resting platform in the middle of what would be quite a dangerous sea.
Yeah.
And you'll get the small birds like the meadowpipits or the thrushes kind of landing on there, but then you'll get like an owl will come in, and the owl will look for the food on the oil rig, and so this huge mechanical alien kind of thing is a refuge for and there's a North Sea Birders Club for people on oil rigs, which must be great because it can be quite a depressing place to work, I think. Again, birds can give you that lift sometimes when you need it most.
No, definitely. I think I do have one other question, which it might be a bit, not hard to answer, but I was just wondering if you have an idea of like how long it might take a bird, who knows what kind of bird, to make this kind of journey? As in, are we talking weeks or months, do you reckon? From the moment, weeks, from the moment they start, either way to...
Yeah, so the cuckoos with the satellite tracking, they can be monitored throughout the year. So they know exactly where they're spending their time. And when they start to set north and when they start to arrive in the UK. And that can be over a matter of weeks to cover that sort of journey. And there have been some remarkable journeys for birds that we don't really think of as migrants, like woodcock, which is a odd little game bird, essentially, although they shouldn't really be shot anymore. But there are a lot of people monitoring woodcock, and they will they'll bring them in the UK, but they'll breed over in Siberia, 3,000 to 4,000 miles away.
Wow.
And they'll get there within a few weeks.
Wow.
It's not. And the tiny birds like sedge warblers they're one of the ones that will fatten up hugely and then make big journeys in one go. Fatten up again and then move on again.
Yeah.
So it's not I mean, they need to do it quickly because they want to get on territory there, get food, get the business done, get the kids reared, and get back again. So time it's a constant pressure, really.
Definitely.
So they can't faff about with it. Really.
No. I have a lot of respect for our migratory birds. Final question for you. Out of all your sort of experiences of witnessing the migration or migrations, have you sort of had any like epic sightings which have really stood out to you? You've just been like, oh my gosh, I've just seen a ... some sort of vulture, or I don't know, something that...
I guess for me, it's not the rarity value particularly. It's the
numbers.
It's often the common stuff.
Okay, yeah, in big numbers,
or the regular. Yeah, often big. Just seeing it happening, and just getting that. There's a kind of buzz in the air when you get migration right, and but it was very, very weather dependent. And we've been to southern Spain when it's been really quiet. And you think, well, where are they coming over? And other days we've gone there, and the sea has been full of birds. Full of eagles and storks and things.
You're totally right. There's an excitement about them sort of coming back. I think, and as we were saying earlier, like our first sightings of the swift, it's exciting, and it's like, oh yes, they've made it. They've made the journey. And
that first song of the willow warbler, that lovely descending kind of thing of the willow warbler, is just magic.
It is. I think migration is magic. Thank you so much for chatting to me today about migration, and what an incredible thing our birds go through to get here and to survive. So thank you so much. I hope you'll join me again sometime soon. Until next time, bye. Thank you for listening to this episode. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and if you have any birdie questions you'd like me to explore in this podcast, you can get in touch via my Instagram @wingingitwithholly.